Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Jellison, the director of the Central Region Humanities Center, one of the sponsors of this evening's event. And I must recognize the other co-sponsors, the Department of History, the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, the Office of Sustainability, the Pride Center, the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I should note that in addition to co-sponsoring our speaker this evening, the Pride Center has also arranged for live streaming of this event. So people beyond the four walls of Baker Theater can enjoy Professor Brorby's comments this evening. And I particularly want to thank Micah McCary, the director of the Pride Center, for making those arrangements. So now I am exceedingly pleased to introduce this evening's speaker. We had a delightful, just constant chat fest drive from the Columbus airport this afternoon. So along with all the accomplishments I'm going to tell you about Taylor Brorby, I'll say he is a really nice guy and a great conversationalist. Taylor Brorby is the author of numerous books, including Coming Alive, Action and Civil Disobedience, a book of poetry with a great title, Crude, Poems. And the book for sale in the lobby this evening, Boys and Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. And thanks to Little Professor Book Center for arranging those sales. I've already bought my copy. Taylor's already autographed it. And I'm sure he will be delighted to sell some of his books to any of you and also autograph them. Taylor is the co-editor of another book, Fracture, Essays, Poems, and Stories on Fracking in America. Taylor has been published in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, Literary Hub, Orion Magazine, and his writing has been widely anthologized. His work has been supported by fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the National Books Critics Circle, and the Stone Barnes Center for Food and Agriculture. Taylor has been interviewed about his work on National Public Radio, MSNBC, and he regularly speaks around the country on issues related to library censorship, extractive economies, queerness, and disability. He teaches nonfiction writing at the University of Alabama and is a contributing editor at North American Review. Tonight, his topic is entitled Raising Hell in the Stacks. He said he liked provocative titles, and I thought that sounds like one. So please help me welcome Taylor Brorby.
Well, good evening. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me. If my big sister would hear, she said, no one would ever say that, Taylor. So if I'm coming in a little soft, just tell me to blast the volume and I'll gladly raise my voice. And I feel now like being in the Buckeye State, they just indoctrinate you down in Alabama. I feel like I just have to say Roll Tide every time I open my voice. But we're here for more interesting conversation, and I do hope it's a conversation. I hope I say some things that get your gears going this evening, and later during our Q&A, you really can ask me anything related to being from the frontier, being a tiny ginger, the creative writing process, library censorship. Usually I'm pretty good at spinning some yarn here, so we'll see where we go tonight. But it's a great honor to be here, and Catherine, thank you for bringing me into all the co-sponsorships. I'm very aware of how much work it goes into bringing someone like me to a campus like this. So thank you all for making time for me on Thursday as well. I should ask probably the most interesting question you've been asked recently. Just a quick survey. How many of you have been to the great destination vacation spot that is my home state, North Dakota? Perfect, you're the audience for me. North Dakota is the least visited state in the country. So quick history lesson, even though I'm a writer, not a trained historian. North Dakota, that rectangle of a state, is fenced in by violence. In the west, you have the frackers in chief. In the south, you have the coal baron strip miners. In the east, you have the sugar beet mafia, and in the north, you have the Minutemen missile silos. That is, during the height of the Cold War, patriotic North Dakota farmers had given over their farmland to allow it to be filled and drilled with nuclear warheads that then were aimed across the Arctic ice shelf toward Russia. Now you can go to current Minutemen missile silos and see sunflowers growing next to some of our still active nuclear warheads. But I grew up in a place that I think is perhaps the most interesting nexus of some of the great stories in American history. I grew up 9 miles south from the bend in the Missouri River where Sakakawea met Lewis and Clark. I grew up a half hour north of where George Armstrong Custer last lived before he went west and had the worst day of his life. I grew up 100 miles to the east of where Theodore Roosevelt fled to go to Dakota Territory to help him deal with the death of his wife and mother in the same house in the same day, the cradle of conservation, the Elkhorn Ranch. I grew up 150 miles downstream from where Sitting Bull surrendered his rifle, basically the subjugation of the Native nations to the United States government. So when you grow up in the least visited state, it turns out we've got some great real estate for some complicated American history, including running through the Knife River Indian villages, the former imprints of the Mandan Earth Lodges. And I'm sad to report I was never taught that history growing up. And like I said to Catherine in our car ride today, you know, you see that meme of they did teach you that in school, you just weren't paying attention. This little nerd was definitely paying attention in school, but I did not know that I grew up in a landscape of genocide as well. But I was a curious little boy who grew up swimming in a lake in south central North Dakota that never freezes. If you haven't heard, every lake in North Dakota is supposed to freeze. So the reason Nelson Lake doesn't freeze is because its water is used to cool the coal-fired turbine engines of the power plant where my mother spent the entirety of her career. I grew up in a landscape where people called it God's country, but somehow they made their money by unmaking the world. So somehow you can be a fourth-generation coal miner like I am, and somehow my parents produced a crunchy granola environmentalist out of the deal. But part of what I want to bring to you tonight, we'll eventually get to libraries here, but the mixed grass prairie I grew up on, it's worth noting, it's one of the most diverse bioregions on the planet. It's more diverse than the Amazon rainforest. 100 acres of the mixed grass prairie can support 3,000 species of insects, just insects alone. So an early idea I want to submit to you that I'll come back to later is nature reveals for us to thrive, we need diversity. We need diverse ecosystems. But North Dakota, as I've already suggested to you, largely is a monoculture in how people earn their income depending on the region that you're living in. It is an effective brain drain. There is, for instance, no job for me in North Dakota. Name a famous North Dakota writer. Exactly. I give you one, my big aunt, Louise Erdrich, and after that, maybe you would know my look-alike big brother, Chuck Klosterman, and then Graveyard Silence. It is not a state that is known for producing creativity. It mainly exports it and is predicated on self-destruction from the inside. And North Dakota right now is also leading the nation. Ohio, you're coming in hot on its heels too in library censorship. Ohio actually ranks in the top 17 last year of states trying to outright ban more than 700 different book titles in the state, which might not sound like a lot to you, but keep in mind that the American Library Association reports that 47% of the books that were challenged to be banned last year or removed from library collections featured or were written by queer authors or for the queer community or for BIPOC audiences as Black, Indigenous, people of color, either authors or material covering those topics and those representative groups. And we're also seeing alongside that a huge mental health calamity, especially in the queer community. If you know a queer person, a queer youth, that is between 12 and 24, as the Trevor Project, which is the nonprofit entity whose job it is to study the mental health landscape of queer youth in this country and give us annual reports on the state of queer youth in this country. Last year, 41% of queer youth had suicidal ideation. More than that number is higher amongst transgender youth and non-binary youth. It's more than half. So if you know 2 transgender youth last year, it's a safe bet that one of them thought leaving the planet was a viable option. And part of that, it seems to me, is really relegated to what we're seeing right now in the anti-library bills that are sweeping the nation. If, again, you can keep in mind that 47% of the books that were challenged last year involve this group, the queer community of which I am a part, it makes sense to me that you would, as a young person, say, people are actively trying to I'm only laughing not because it's funny, it's to prevent me from crying, but that my story should be removed. It should be erased. It should be taken out of probably our most democratic institution, the public library. I mean, isn't that incredible? Not only what's happening, but that the library is perhaps the last vestige of radical political inclusiveness we have in this country. If you're like me and you don't own power tools, you can go to the Tuscaloosa Public Library and check them out to help yourself, do what you need to do in your home. It's also a place where children have a political voice. They can roam the library. And I had girlfriends when I was in college who read Jane Eyre when they were 9. I mean, girls are always smarter than boys. It goes without saying. But I thought, that's incredible. You can go where your interests take you. And it's one of the places we allow in American society for us to not be sold anything. You can go and actually get help and get resources, whether that's to help you with your cover letters or your resumes, but also that help can look like encountering stories of people who are like you or different from you. And it seems to me right now that most of this radical anti-library legislation is actually popping up in fossil fuel states. Wyoming, Texas, North Dakota, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio are leading the charges here. Not too far away in Virginia, just last year, Samuels County Library launched an anti-library initiative called Clean Up Samuels Public Library. That's an incredible phrase, because if Catherine were to come to me and say, Taylor, I'm doing this environmental campaign called Clean Up the Missouri River, I'd be there. But this implies when we're saying in our libraries that we need to clean them up, that there are clean stories and dirty stories. And if we think that a lot of those titles that are challenged are about Black and brown people or queer people, that inherently can imply that those are dirty stories. In the state where I live, the great state of Alabama that produced some of our great writers of the 20th century, Harper Lee and Truman Capote, Helen Keller as well. Alabama has some great writers, Brad Watson, people we should still be reading. We have a campaign that mimics this one from Samuels County Public Library. There's a nonprofit initiative right now sweeping the state, led by Moms for Liberty, called Clean Up Alabama. But the tagline is actually what really terrifies me. The tagline is tidying up Alabama's libraries. That is very dangerous rhetoric that's being laid at the hands and feet of our librarians who are beyond taxed right now, overworked, stressed, having to comb through their collections. In North Dakota, last year, Jamestown Public Library, to re-examine their collection, to bring it up to the most recent passing legislation in the state legislature, it costs them the tune of about $55,000. Your librarians already vet texts. They've already done this, but depending on what your state legislature passes, it will actually pull resources from elsewhere. So we're in this conversation right now of misplacing resources, of abusing resources, of wasting librarians' time when they could be spending it on programming, on building their collection rather than re-examining it, and worried that, for instance, in 2023, the North Dakota State Legislature had tried to redefine what pornography was, and the definition was so vague in the state that it would encompass anything from a biological textbook to classical Greek art. In fact, the legislation even had such specific language around it that it included, the area around a female presenting human's nipple and the measurement of the image that would be acceptable here. And that if a library was caught to be in possession of such a text, say the Venus de Milo or something, the librarians could be slapped with a misdemeanor, a Class B misdemeanor, which in the state would have been a fine of about $1,200 and or up to 28 days imprisonment. West Virginia has capitalized on this in a more radical way. Right now, there's legislation that's being considered and drafted that would bump it up to a felony charge, up to a $25,000 fine and 5 years imprisonment as well. I mean, this is a phenomenal thing when you think about this, because what libraries do is they grant access, and they grant access to people who might not otherwise have funds. I mean, if you are independently wealthy, you can buy whatever you damn well please and, forget about your neighbor. But that is what's incredible about a library, is that it is a resource for the public to use and to benefit from. And what I want to also suggest is, remember how nature thrives in diversity. We've got our 3,000 species of insects per 100 acres. Our libraries mimic that concept best. We have diverse books by diverse authors that span time, region, nationality, voices. You can meet a character radically different from you. I've never lived in Brooklyn. I grew up in a trailer house in a county without a stoplight. But there are novels, there are memoirs I have access to show me another way of existing on the planet, other stories that might complicate my story, might help me see that the way I grew up is not the only way to grow up. In fact, that I might want to change how I exist on the planet. And right now, as we go into this political season, don't worry, I'm not talking about my birthday, though you all can think about that. You're all voting on my 37th birthday this fall, so cheers to us all on that. But in the midst of this great election, we also are seeing the unraveling of our local communities and the stories they're telling, about really seeing publicly voiced people who are invoking harm, are othering people who should be included in communities, are fostering a conversation that children hear, that children go home and think about. I know this because I was this little boy. I'll tell you an actual hopeful story for those of you who are budding writers. Sometimes writers get asked, who do you write your book for? And I'm just old, fat, and tired and lazy as a writer. And so I study library bookshelves and usually go, why doesn't that book exist? And then I write it. So if you name a well-known gay memoir of the American West, it's out there for $28.95 for sale. No, but this was my predicament, that I thought I wasn't writing the book for me. I really thought of it almost more like a public service thing. I thought there's a let's make it up. There's a 12-year-old gay boy growing up in Broadus, Montana. Anybody been to Broadus? You haven't even been to North Dakota. No, you haven't. It's about the size of a nickel, you know? And I thought, there's some little gay boy in that town who needs to have a book on the library shelf that helps him feel less alone, that talks about the landscape, that talks about being open to the beauty of the American West, about the inherent feeling of being different in the place where you're growing up. So I wrote it. But my own book, and this is rare for an author to say, actually changed my life. A year ago, I was back home in the region in North Dakota, in Fargo, and of course, a blizzard whipped up, so thank you for the nice weather. A blizzard whipped up during dinner. 8 inches of snow fell during my reading. And I was reading at an independent bookstore in a room that could hold about 100 people, 150 people were there. And afterwards, people were coming through the signing line. And the worst thing for an author is if someone comes up to you, but they don't have your book. Because not only is a book a nice thing to have an author write in, it's also a societally acceptable way of beginning and ending a conversation. Oh, do you spell Catherine with a C or a K? Oh, Catherine, where do you live? Thanks so much. Thank you. Move along. These 2 older women scurry up to me. No book. Uh-oh, I think. Chatty, chatty, chatty. One of them is trying to expand an image. They're probably in their early 70s on their cell phone. She has glasses on. I'll learn her name's Linda. The woman next to her in a green pea coat is named Max. And Max says, oh, Taylor, we've been waiting to meet you. Linda is the pastor that baptized you. And I thought, no. Like, I grew up in a tiny town, 600. We only had male pastors. These women didn't take their ginkgo biloba. They must have confused me with another Taylor Brorby or something. But I saw on Linda's cell phone my sister's full birth name. And my sister, she's not here tonight, but she sometimes comes to my literary events as like my muscle because she's louder and more intimidating than I could ever be. And she had a t-shirt on that said, it's a great day to burn down the patriarchy. So she was easy to point out. I said, oh, well, my sister's over here. Why don't you go and say hi to her? And Tanya, who's a decade older than I am, yells, Pastor Linda? This was, in fact, our pastor. I am the last person Linda baptized because in the late 1980s in the Lutheran church that I was raised in, you could not openly be gay and out of the closet and be an ordained Lutheran minister. And Max and Linda are now happily married, but they fell in love in my small town. And Linda eventually left ministry and went on to become a therapist. But I thought people knew that story where I grew up in small town America. And people didn't tell me that story. It would have been at a certain point such a helpful story to me that like in 1988, a lesbian dunked a little gay boy in the Jesus juice. They could even blame her for making me gay or something, but I thought she did it in front of my grandparents. You know, I thought that was, I mean, coming from a coal mining town, that is an actual story of reclamation for me. And I keep thinking about that in the time that we're in right now. What are our stories of reclamation? What is our role in the communities we live in? Whether that's leading writing workshops for marginalized communities. Maybe it is finally time to run for the library board. But what is the thing that needs to be done? As Marge Percy, the poet, says, you know, we all have work to do. And I keep thinking of that great line from the John Guare play Shadowlands about C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis didn't actually say this, but he makes the character C.S. Lewis say this in the play. A woman asks him, Mr. Lewis, why is it we read? And he says, we read to know that we're not alone. That is incredible. It's why we still read Socrates, even though he's like Novocaine in your brain. Sorry, philosophers. You know, or you read books that make you feel other emotions in your body, too, that are exciting. And so there's a way that the limiting of stories right now is also the limiting of processes by which we can not only earn our living, but see our place in the world. If you're only being fed ways of bringing home the bacon that are predicated on destroying the very environment you live in, we are now taking that to the libraries. We are now not destroying the landscape only, the topsoil, the ability to grow crops, the flaring of natural gas. We are taking it into our imaginations and our minds and saying that now we will have a monocultured way of thinking. It's exhausting to me. I hope it is to you. And so I need to take just another breath for some liquid here, but I'm going to take a breath, and I want to start cracking it up for some questions, but I'll keep talking, but start fostering some questions in your mind, and I'll be coming in hot here after my just quick final comments. I think one thing, just to sort of bring the point home right now, is that libraries also do more than just give us stories. They're safe refuges. One thing, when this library censorship started sweeping the nation, you write a book and you kind of forget what's in your own book. But in my book, there are these scenes. After I was outed on my oldest nephew's 5th birthday. My aunt called my mother and said, I'm worried Taylor might be gay. Language really matters, worried, There are other things to maybe worry about with me, but and it blew up my family as just the short story of it. We're still in recovery mode. My parents and I don't communicate. Don't worry, I've gone to plenty of therapy. Their loss, not mine. But I fled to the library during that period because it was about the only place I could go and listen to myself think. And not think, oh, I better buy a Starbucks coffee or someone's getting. The nice thing about libraries is generally they're quiet places, that you're not hearing a lot of chatter or a lot of drama. And so I had the ability to check out music and CDs to calm my mind. I got to roam bookshelves and read memoirs of people who had struggled with their own families. And it's back to that C.S. Lewis a la Shadowlands play idea to help me feel less alone, to help me know that though my struggle might be unique for me, it was not the first time such a thing had happened in human history, and could I maybe see a model for how to deal with it? If you come from a family that doesn't believe in therapy, maybe you've read a memoir where people do go to therapy and it helps them, and then you go, maybe there's something there. It's our way of seeing options. But right now, it is a good time, I think, to really be taking up your pens, to be entering into your letters to the editor, or at least writing thank you letters to your local librarians, because I can tell you they are the people, having gone around the country speaking at library conferences. I will tell you this, your librarians are usually the first people queer youth come out to. And all librarians that come up to me and tell me this are always shocked. I know why. I know why queer youth come out to librarians, because a librarian's whole job is to get them stories, the stories that they need. And so I think in this time it's helpful for us all to be thinking about the stories that not only we need, but our communities need, whether it is to be challenged, to be uplifted, to be supported. And I hope you'll take up your pens like I like to do and get into your op-ed sections and raise a little hell, because it's a hell of a good time. I'm gonna stop talking for a bit. I wanna help you with whatever is on your mind. Could we shift into some Q&A time? We've got microphones, but if you ask it loud enough, well, maybe the mics are best because we're being streamed, but I can also repeat your question. I will say, I learned this from Larry McMurtry. There's no such thing as a wrong question, but there is such a thing as a long question. And I did live in New York for a while, so I can keep you to the point. But what can I help you with tonight?
I'll start the ball rolling. And this mic is working? Okay, yeah. We had a bit of a, as I would call it, a hoop-de-doo here in Athens a few years ago with the drag queen story time at the public library.
Yeah.
And most people embraced it, but I do, speaking of letters to the editor, I do remember some people writing, you know, letters to the editor that this is an outrage, they're not paying their tax dollars to have, you know, this kind of event. So why has that been, of all activities, such a flashpoint for the people who want to raise hell in the stacks?
Yeah, it seems to me, and I was living in Salt Lake when this was sort of really blowing up, and we, a bookstore had done a drag children's hour that they had to cancel because a bomb threat had been called into the bookstore. It is a very concerning thing to me. Drag, as I understand it, and it's since we're living in the plague times or the less severe plague times, I haven't gone to a good drag show in about a decade, it seems, at this point. But it seems to be, you know, challenging our notions of gender and sexuality and embracing challenging circumstances as I see it. Other people have different interpretations. I wonder if it's because, like so many things people claim to hate, they actually don't take the time to understand what it's actually doing. Because if you would say, let's take a certain mentality. I would venture to say this mentality that's outraged by drag performance isn't by a ring bearer and a flower girl, which to me is far more related to sexualizing children than anything drag is trying to do. Drag is more about the performer and showing you, to be blunt, how fabulous you are. It's not trying to groom you in the way for the bedroom that it seems we do with child beauty pageants and things like this. I think there must be some unexamined part of people who are enraged by that is kind of like doing a thought experiment. Like if you're in a first-year religion class or philosophy class and you grew up, you know, Christian, let's just say, and you have to actually go through the thought of, what if there isn't a God? What does that do to the bedrock way you understand your life and your thinking? I wonder if drag is so challenging for certain people, not that there's even something in it that they might like, though I would say, again, drag is for everyone, but that there's some part that's related to self-loathing and self-hatred. I just have to believe that. I have too many other things to do to outright hate something like this so vehemently, but people seem to really hate drag queens during this time. And I think it's probably related to those people's own trauma that they haven't dealt with, and that there's something that's provocative or provoked in them by this publicly being performed that they can't fathom, I guess, is sort of my half-baked theory related to that, Catherine. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So I had to turn around when Catherine raised that question up because my name is Nick Tepe. I'm the director of Athens County Public Libraries. And I do actually genuinely have a question for you, but I'll get to that in a moment here. I'm also the Ohio chapter counselor for the American Library Association. So I may be reaching out to you about some speaking gigs, but I'm sure that that'll be lovely. So the drag queen story times were amazing. Our community showed up for those, made a huge splash. We only had one protester. We're pretty sure it was the same person at both of them. So we were kind of riding high on that. But then last year, we had a series of letters to the, in 2023, we had a series of letters to the editor accusing us of pushing the woke gay agenda because we had pride displays in the libraries, and calling on concerned citizens to come to our board meeting to protest. Well, we had over 70 people show up at our board meeting, and all but 2 of them were supporters of the library. So a huge show of support from the Athens community, which is what I would expect from Athens. Athens City is a very liberal island, very progressive, activist liberal island in the middle of a sea of Appalachian red. What happened after that, though, was there continued to be low rumblings all around us of dissatisfaction with the library having these pride displays. And we were put in a position of trying to figure out, well, how do we actually serve the entire community in this sort of an environment? And I will be the first one to say that I made multiple mistakes as I tried to navigate that with my staff. And unfortunately, that resulted in some of my staff feeling like I was saying that we needed to stop doing a lot of the pride celebrations that we were. That was never my intention. That was what was heard. And this past summer, our pride displays and programming and everything, I know too, a lot of the folks in the LGBTQ community felt more subdued than it had been in the past. And that resulted in a further kerfuffle instead coming at us from the left this year. So we really are stuck in a rock and a hard place. I'm stymied at this point, and this is what I'd love to hear from you. My approach throughout my entire career has been essentially to be subversive. Yeah. It's like how I want there to be LGBTQ representation throughout the collection. I want there to be LGBTQ materials in every display that we put out. That doesn't necessarily mean that we throw pride flags up everywhere, because unfortunately there are a lot of people who are driven to violence. Yeah. In that, and I don't want to put targets on the back of either my patrons or my staff. Yeah. So we're trying to now figure out, what do we do next year? Yeah. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I can invent a silver bullet. We're all trying to find them. Well, I wear my little, the North Dakota librarians have had my back for a long time, and I try to advocate for them too. And so they send me these nice little rainbow rubber bands that I get to wear about the North Dakota Library Association. Their hashtag is Books for All. And I keep thinking, to your point, that we are living in a time with a great chilling effect. I mean, next month I'm terrified to be a university professor in Alabama because our anti-DEI legislation is going into, in the spring I taught a Queering the Memoir class. In the future I'll probably just teach a memoir class. The hard thing is that a chilling effect makes us all terrified. As you say, it is the worry of the boogeyman out there that some people, rightly, are provoked to violence. I mean, I get this. I'm a queer man whose research is like hydraulic fracking in rural America. I don't wear this pin when I'm in bars in Western North Dakota, things like this. We have to be safe. I guess part of it is also wondering if your board's on your side, and to really be having some serious, intense conversations leading up to that to say, what does our programming look like? Does it, do you have queer authors come in to give a reading? Is the only, I'll just say this, just to be blunt, I do love being like the gay little boy from a trailer house and getting to say gay, gay, gay publicly all the time. But I do find being gay about the least interesting thing about me. I think my red hair is more interesting. But it is important to be out, of course. I'm not saying to go back in the closet. I don't have a good answer for you because it's a question I'm mulling right now that it makes sense for our libraries to be prudent, to be safe, to not be courting violence. But how is it we should be shifting the narrative to say, why do violent people feel like they get to run this goddamn country? I'm so tired of this, The first day of school yesterday in Georgia, we have a school shooting, they said on NPR, it's school shooting season. Why write fiction? Real life is far more interesting and terrifying. I could never invent this, but to think that people would find it so worth their time that, let me just be blunt, books didn't make me gay. They activated a way of knowing that there were people like me in the world, that clearly there was a sense in my mind, maybe not everyone here is. And that's also not lovely as a child to think that most people you're around might potentially not like. That's also not great of me to view people that way. no book has made me anything other than more open-minded. And I think that's part of what is disturbing to certain people during this time, as publishing is slowly, but it is representing more people, becoming more diverse. There is the backlash that we're living in right now. I do believe, as we've seen in the last month, though, we have maybe seen the pendulum swing as far for now as it's what, like, people are people are realizing, like, we are in a dangerous culture right now. And why should we have to worry that librarians are going to be imprisoned? I mean, did we all not read Fahrenheit 451? Did we all not see what Nazis did? I mean, the idea that these people aren't patriots, they're nationalists. I'm a patriot. I believe in, you know, the freedom to read and to read anything you want. But I think it is incumbent on your board to, as you say, they're supportive. It's figuring out how to be subversive during these times. I mean, for all we know, we could be going into darker times where certain things have to go underground, but I still think people are going to be sending up signals that help people know how to get the resources they need. I'm sorry I can't help you more. I mean, it's, oh my God, well, Jesus, we all, that is the thing that keeps me up at night. Yeah, thank you for that, though. What else? Yeah.
I want to give a little context to my question. So, you know, the Right Wing Project is about profit making, keeping profit in the moneyed class. Divide and conquer has always been a good method to keep your opposition divided and weak. So that's what's going on, obviously. But the question that I have, like in this larger context, many of us, you know, grew up loving our libraries, still love our libraries. The branches for the county library are out in these red areas. Yeah. And like you said, with tools and bicycles and games, and, you know, they just keep increasing their offerings. Yeah. Do you know how many people go to their libraries? Do you know how many people these days love their libraries?
I don't
It's like
have
getting
that,
outside, you know, you protect what you love.
Yeah.
So how do we maximize that?
Yeah, I don't have that statistic for you. I would recommend, I bet the American Library Association does, though. They keep such great statistics about this, that, and the other about, I don't know, I could see them even doing county by county how many people frequent it. I mean, I go to my public library every week, and I'll tell you, I'm not the oldest and I'm not the youngest. There's a huge age span there, and that's mainly what I really take heart in, is that it's not just young families going for children's story hour to get, I mean, children's books are, I mean, they're very expensive, you know, and the amount children go through, but I see people who are well above octogenarians at my local library as well. I don't have that statistic, but I do think, again, I mean, this is, if libraries are still one of the last vestiges of a democratic society, I still do. I think letters to the editor are, I mean, it's when I'm my most volatile, you know, and I love having a good back and forth, and because it disappears. And I think we have to be mindful of how we're publicly announcing our support, and we should be doing it more often. I mean, or bring a friend, or take a neighbor kid with you to the library. I mean, I don't know that, I certainly wasn't taken to the library. I went to the library, you know, and so that was just my own stubborn Scandinavian side as like a 6-year-old doing it. But other children don't do that. And so I think we also need adults who are willing to befriend youth and develop some relationships that way as well. One thing your question provoked in me that I want to mention too, related to the fossil fuel states as well, where a lot of this anti-library censorship is happening. It does seem to be that we're playing on a well-worn historical tactic. I mean, let us remember what Abraham Lincoln said about freeing the slaves. he would say he would free none of them if he could avoid a war. I mean, and on the phrase went. It wasn't just this grand enlightenment. He eventually somewhat got there. It also was a convenient tactic. Watch what my right hand's doing while my left hand is creating and committing the largest genocide in humans' history. That is the freeing up of the frontier for white settlement. We're seeing a variation on that right now. Libraries, drag story hours are a nice provocative thing while a new technology is being developed that's impacting every state called carbon capture and storage. You have it here in Ohio. Will impact every state from Maine to California. It's where we'll capture carbon dioxide emissions on site, liquefy them, send it to North Dakota through a new pipeline system that will pump it 6,000 feet underground where it will stay forever. Liquid carbon dioxide, when it meets with moisture, becomes carbonic acid. And pipelines, as we know, always break. And now, if it's a slightly breezy day, like it always is in North Dakota, carbonic acid, if you and I breathe it, it's fatal. It also displaces oxygen in engines. EMTs cannot get to you. I mean, and we are going to be doing this. I mean, my home power plant, look up Project Tundra. It's my home power plant where my mother worked, is the world's test site for this technology. One of the main advocates in the state legislature, remember that anti-pornography legislation I was telling you about, woman's nipple and the measurement? The main author of that also worked at Minn Kota Power and is a major proponent of carbon capture and storage. So it's a nice distraction technique to also pillage the prairie even further. Liquid carbon dioxide also becomes a carbon credit. So instead of being taxed at a higher rate for carbon emissions, you actually have an asset. Liquid carbon dioxide can replace water in the process of hydraulic fracking. So it can be captured at biodiesel power plants, for instance. It links big ag to natural gas, to fracking, to coal mining. I mean, this is also what we're in. I mean, it is not lost on me that we'll get people concerned over children's books in their libraries and distract them, which we have sufficiently done, while the environmental movement has been far behind in raising awareness about this technology. So that's also part of why protecting our libraries is important, because we need a generation of young people to not be bamboozled in the way some of American society is right now. Yeah, please.
This was more of a comment and a little bit of history. But
You all are so naughty here.
I think that this is kind of like there are so many things that you said that I can really relate to. I'm also an LGBTQ plus American, and I'm a historian. I think probably the latter is more interesting than the former, at least in my own judgment. And I always used to quote that quote from Shadowlands, thinking that C.S. Lewis actually said that.
Yeah.
So I'm devastated to know that, but I'm still going to quote it. But
Yeah. He would have said it, yeah.
I'm just going to kind of like go with this and show you a little bit of my historian. I guess the question would be, would you agree with this as one tactic?
Okay.
It's kind of maybe playing a little bit on the field of the other side and using some of the things that they have. And I think all Americans, not all Americans, but there's kind of a popular view of World War II being the good war and
Sure.
all of that. So if we look at that, if you talked about violence and propaganda films, you think of Why We Fight, and there's a lot in there about mobilizing people to fight. But there was another series that was done in World War II by the Office of War Information called The American Scene. And it was, somebody thought it should be called The Democratic Scene. And so these were films for overseas audiences to say what was good about America, and there was no mention of the war. And they were wartime propaganda films. One was about an election in the U.S., another about the TVA, showing how Americans solve problems. And here's what I'm leading to. There was one called The Library of Congress. And it's 20 minutes. The actor Ralph Bellamy narrated it.
Okay.
And the whole purpose of this was to show not just the Library of Congress as a building, but the American free library system as a source of American democracy, and something that we should be proud of.
Yeah.
And you can Google this film. All you have to do is type in Library of Congress, 1945, and you will see it. C-SPAN has it up.
Okay.
And I think kind of using that, and that film showed a 1945 understanding of what diversity was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, playing kind of on their field, saying, look, in World War II, this was a source of pride. And it alludes to, Taylor, something you said also about what the Nazis did. That's the implication of this. Which side do you really want to be on?
Yeah.
And I mean, we saw this at the most recent Democratic convention, where Democrats are kind of like trying to reclaim some of these symbols of places. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I mean, so these are things that, you know, kind of like, you know, people think of liberals on the coasts, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in the middle of the country. So a lot of comments. I guess the question is this a good tactic that we should use?
Yeah. Well, I think any sort of tactic we can take to win the day right now is short of, you know, I'm obviously a big advocate for nonviolent protesting. I was the first person in Iowa arrested over the Dakota Access Pipeline. You know, I thought, well, I'm not a Rockefeller. I grew up in a trailer house, but you kind of have to bite the hand that feeds you. You know, I benefited from the fossil fuel industry. Certainly was treated a lot better than my fellow protesters at Standing Rock, I'll say that. But I mean, why not try to be more active and persuasive? And if we label it, I guess, propaganda, though I would say it's just sort of reminding people and awakening them to the reality that we do have these democratic institutions that are meant for our use. Like, you can, as I did, go to the Library of Congress and play George Gershwin's piano, or hold, I am exactly, in case you were curious, the height of Charles Dickens because I held his walking stick. And these are things for us, the American people, to have access to. And I think part of that is, at one point, we probably all knew that because our teachers probably took us to the library or we took field trips there. So when does that interest wane? And I'm not talking just about books. There's this whole thing, youth don't read anymore, blah, blah, blah. I am so much with the late, great Robert Caro. Let me just tell you, there are millions of readers in this country. Now, it is also true there are millions of people who don't read, but I am on the side of the readers over here. You know, I just want to like beat that into the ground of like, people don't buy books, forget it. But I think to your tactic, we have to employ, I mean, we are at a great crux right now in this country if you're not aware of this. Like, we are teetering on the verge of some very scary things, and the access to information is vital, and that's what libraries do. So I think whatever we have to do, I'm so glad, speaking of the DNC, that Michelle Obama finally woke up and didn't say when they go low, we go high. Let me tell you, I grew up playing a game called Smear the Queer on the prairie. This little queer never got smeared. I only believe in winning. You know, and like if we win, my worldview of the library benefits everyone. That's the reality, rather than thinking people who are advocating for censorship are interested in erasing people. I can't get behind that. Yeah, go for it, Meg.
As somebody that does do history, but also has a great deal of appreciation and knowledge for more of the high-tech, technological, internet access of things, how do you think libraries, as in the physical space, can use all the resources at hand to reach a kid who, quite frankly, is probably very isolated in a rural area? Maybe he or she is homeschooled, maybe they go to a religious school, or maybe their school isn't exactly the most accepting in the world of being quote-unquote different.
Yeah.
How do we transcend the physical space of the library into the cyberspace as a way to make these kids feel that they're not alone, no matter where in the United States they are, as long as they have access to an internet signal?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the short answer is to make sure that they know the library exists. I mean, I don't really know of a library who's not on the World Wide Web right now. Now, it's a different question about how well-funded that library is and what resources it does have. But your question is well taken. I don't know how to crack people who might be from backgrounds that maybe are a little more hostile to other worldviews. That is Let me just put it this way. Somehow I come from very conservative parents and they got a socialist out of the deal. I don't know where I came from, but it's possible, you know, I get to say these things because we're not at my university, you know, but to your point, I mean, that is part of it. The access is one part of your question, but just to undergird some of what you're saying, Meg, I think it's a fabulous time to be alive because we are aware about neurodivergency, and librarians are on the front lines of getting access to materials in a variety of forms to help people, whether it's for their filmmaking or helping them read in a way that works for their brain in all its complexity. But you're asking again, sort of like our friend from the library over here, the billion-dollar question of how do you, I guess the root of that is, are people inherently interested in the library? And if not, why not? And that's where the interesting dialogue comes from.
I think I remember reading a few years ago when Florida had passed that atrocious Don't Say Gay bill, that I believe it was New York City Public Libraries had, I'm not exactly sold with the dynamics of this, but they had issued effectively an e-library card to every
Yes,
youth in the United States.
that's right.
So even if they could not access the book in the census that Florida was going through, they could get on their cell phone, their tablet,
Right.
what have you, and go to the New York Public Library and have a broader access
Right.
to
Yeah, no, you're correct. Yeah. Let's maybe do two more. And I would love for some students too.
I'll carry the mic to anybody who wants to ask a question. Thank you for sharing your story. My question, I think, is a little bit a different route into what I thought Meg was headed, and that is, I'm thinking about, you know, the extent to which social media has replaced libraries as a conduit for people to get information, often bad information, but it's also the other site in which we as a society are talking about and discussing censorship, right? And how we square that, or how we might kind of square that in thinking about this, right, as both a source of connectivity for many people who are otherwise isolated, but also a place in which you can go and find lots of anger and venom, and what in some ways can be a place different from libraries, a hostile place.
I think your excellent question comes back to the universal thing we're all struggling for, is literacy right now. I mean, this is a larger project you're suggesting, you know, to think, what is truth? How do we know what's true? What's a fact? We now live in a time where there's this weird thing called, you know, it's like lies 2.0. We now call them alternate facts. You know, it's what we used to call lies are now called alternative facts. We've got a lot of work to do, just to your question, because it is very true in my decade of college teaching of seeing a slippage in the ability to filter what is a verifiable source, one that has been vetted, one that believes in rigorous journalism beyond just opinion. And we're living in a time of great distraction. I mean, I feel that, you know, we're all addicted to our devices. So I think it comes back to investing in education. I mean, I really think like kindergarten teachers should be paid about $250,000. They're a far better teacher than I am. I mean, it is true. You're trying to meet the different needs of various students, but that needs to be supported at every level going forward. I'm not sure how easy it is to correct once the horse is off to the races. I don't know, Brian, I know. It's the work we're trying to do. You know, where did you get that? And I think we have to be open to challenging each other, our students, and to slow down some of the processes we probably used to take for granted. Yeah. What else? I've learned this thing through teaching. If I stare at someone long enough, students, maybe one more. Or we can be very Lutheran, and thank you for a lovely evening, you all. I'll see you out front.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Brorby. Brorby. Of course, you know, when we were first communicating, I kept thinking your name was Brorby, or yeah, Brorby. Is that Norwegian? Norwegian, yes. Well, I'm Swedish American, so I can. Okay, we can still be friends. Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you all for being a great audience. Taylor Brorby will be out front selling and signing books, and I want to invite people back for the next couple of days here in this room, beginning at 9 a.m. Friday and 9 a.m. Saturday for the Gender and Sexuality in the Midwest Conference. Taylor's comments tonight I've been calling a pre-conference lecture, but many of the themes that he introduced tonight and that we've all been talking about, we will have follow-up discussion of those themes at the conference, and it's free, and there's lots of free food. Speaking of which, eat more food while you are buying Taylor's book. So thank you all very much, and especially Taylor.